Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a really thick stack of sources. We've got articles, witness accounts, police notes, a bit of historical research.
A fascinating collection.
It is, and it weaves together this chilling story of wealth, of ruthless ambition, ancient secrets, and a small community's furious, quiet resistance. This is the deep dive into the case of Arthur Everard Rainbow. He was a wealthy antique dealer whose attempted hostile takeover of a very close-knit Welsh border community ended decisively and violently.
It's a foundational narrative, really, isn't it? You have this powerful external force, modern money, calculated ambition, and it just clashes head-on with this entrenched local identity and tradition.
Right.
And our mission today, as we go through this material, is to get beyond just the simple facts of the murder. We want to understand why this man, Rainbow, wasn't just disliked.
No, it was more than that.
Oh, much more. He was perceived as a, quote, foreign body. His disruption was so profound, so structurally threatening to the town of Middlehope that, well, in the eyes of some, he had to be expelled, fully and permanently.
His wealth got him there.
It did. His wealth and his technical savvy brought him to Middlehope, but, they ultimately sealed his fate.
And what a statement his arrival was. I mean, Arthur Everard Rainbow, or AER as the notes call him.
Yeah, AER.
He comes to Middlehope from Birmingham, and he doesn't just buy the old rectory, he consumes it.
That is the perfect word for it. This was a grand, sort of monstrous 18th century vicarage. It had seen better days, for sure.
And its last incarnation was, what, a school?
A special school, yes, for high IQ delinquents. The sources call it a gallant experiment that had finally, run its course.
So AER takes this place, this gallant experiment, and in just 3 months he transforms it, renames it Abbott's Bail House.
And that transformation, it just speaks volumes about his intentions, doesn't it? We're talking about an overwhelming display of instant wealth. It feels like it was designed to make the locals feel small.
How so? What are the details?
Well, newly surfaced drives that, glistened in the sun.
Yes.
Meticulously manicured lawns where wildflowers had probably grown for centuries.
Right. Taming the landscape.
Exactly. And the crowning touch, the thing that everyone mentions, are these drive gates. He put up a pair of imported, intimidating baronial lions.
Baronial lions in the Welsh borders.
Exactly. They're gripping these escutcheons, and they are absolutely not native to the area. They were symbols he'd acquired, quote, in the course of business.
So the sources make it clear that the house itself, it wasn't just about showing off his money, it was a tool.
Precisely. The house wasn't a home. It was the ultimate lavish showcase. He poured a huge stake into that property, betting that this grand, instantly authoritative setup would sell antiques far more effectively than any town shop.
So it's a PR exercise.
A massive public relations exercise. It was all designed to announce his instant Lord of the Manor status in a region, this hypersensitive Welsh border country that instinctively deeply distrusts the newly rich.
And especially the arrogant who don't respect history.
Especially them, yes.
It's so interesting that the sources introduce us to this entire scene through the eyes of George Felse, who's the head of Midshire CID.
And his wife, Bunty?
And his wife, Bunty, Bernarda Elliott, a mezzo-soprano. And they're invited to the housewarming specifically because of Bunty's reputation in the Commerbourne Musical Association.
Which is a body that AER already has his sights on.
Unmistakably, the sources say he was already recruiting support for a hostile takeover bid at every opportunity.
And this detail is just so crucial. It defines his entire strategy, networking, as conquest. He didn't come to Middlehope to live among them. He came to control their resources.
He'd done his homework?
Oh, absolutely. He arrived already primed with knowledge about the local institutions, about key figures like Bunny Felse. The police notes describe Middlehope as hypersensitive territory, critical and aloof.
A tribal solidarity.
That's the phrase. It's a community that can assimilate outsiders, but only if they're willing to adapt and, humble themselves a bit.
Which AER was never going to do.
Not a chance. He arrived demanding that the locals adapt to his terms. He chose the latter path instantly.
So let's really unpack this cultural clash. AER was absolutely determined to become the squire, right? The central figure. But his whole approach was just utterly tone-deaf to the local quiet culture.
Completely. He didn't see Middlehope as a web of relationships, of history. He saw it purely as a market to be exploited, a ladder to climb.
His strategy was just so functional, so transactional.
100%. He immediately joins every group he thinks is important. The golf club, the arts association, the angling society,
There's that great line in one of the notes.
the one about God.
Yes. It says, if he could have secured entry to a club of which God was a member, he would have undoubtedly invited God to his housewarming.
And it's not even really a joke, is it? It perfectly captures his mindset. The whole thing, Abbott's Bail House, was just this ambitious public relations exercise designed to impress and co-opt, not to connect.
And we really can't forget the history of that house. Before AER, it was this school.
The gallant experiment.
Right. For these high IQ delinquents, the whole philosophy was plain living and very high thinking. It was about challenging these incredibly bright kids intellectually to keep them out of mischief.
A noble idea.
And AER just sweeps all that away. He replaces this focus on advanced education and thought with, expensive furniture, imported art, and suggestive statues of nymphs and satyrs in the garden?
It's the perfect analogy for the core conflict here, isn't it? Substance versus superficial show. The school wanted to cultivate inherent intelligence. AER wanted to buy and display acquired wealth.
And Bunty Felse just nails it. She observes that AER wouldn't waste time on anything at which he couldn't excel.
Right. He was technically brilliant at everything, including music, but he lacked any genuine depth, any soul.
Which is a theme that comes up again and again. And it leads us straight to the great gatekeeper of Middle Hope's culture, Miss de la Pole.
Ah, yes, Miss de la Pole.
She's the long-standing church organist and choir mistress, described as having the steely, delicate profile of a Renaissance Italian.
She is the voice of authentic local culture, absolutely. And she delivers the final, crushing judgment on AER's ability even before the murder.
She hears him play, right, on his own superb piano.
Yes, and she admits he is astonishingly competent technically on almost any keyboard instrument. He can play the notes perfectly.
But her final verdict
is just damning. What a pity he isn't in the least degree musical.
Ooh.
And that distinction is everything. It's technical arrogance versus cultural depth. He could master the mechanism of music, but he completely missed the soul, the whole.
Let's pause on that, because while is a term that comes up repeatedly, it's the core cultural element that AER just destroys. For listeners who might not be familiar, it's much more than just feeling, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. While is a deep, often spiritual sense of passionate enthusiasm. It's like a fervor or an uplift, traditionally associated with Welsh preaching and, critically for this story, Welsh hymn singing.
So in the context of the St. Ietta's choir in Middle Hope,
it's the emotional commitment. It's what transforms a technical exercise into a communal, spiritual act. And AER, in his relentless pursuit of excellence, could only ever achieve the technical exercise.
He didn't get it.
He didn't get that the value of the music was in the shared feeling, the while, not of the flawless execution of the notes. And that failure made him a foreign body in the most profound sense possible.
So before we get into the actual disruption he causes, let's quickly introduce some of the other key local figures who sort of embody this resistance.
Good idea.
Beyond the Felses and Miss de la Pole, we have Willie the Twig, the forest warden.
Willie the Twig is the essential local recluse, isn't he? He's completely self-sufficient, prefers the company of his deer and his setters to, social chit-chat.
And he's noted for being impervious. He has this deep, almost ancestral knowledge of the region's old ways.
He represents the silent, uncorruptible resistance of the land itself. You can't buy him. You can't impress him. He just is.
Then there's Toby Malcolm. He's a key figure from that old delinquent school.
Right. Toby is the success story, the product of the old regime. He was this brilliant, athletic young man who went straight, became a successful theater professional lights, staging adaptations for a traveling troupe.
But he still comes back to Middle Hope.
He does. He's fiercely loyal to the area and to Sam Jarvis, who is his former teacher and is the father of the boy who becomes absolutely central to this case.
And, of course, the local law, Sergeant Moon.
Moon is critical. He's not just a police officer. He's more like an anthropologist of Middle Hope. He understands the community structure inside and out.
He's the one who says when Middle Hope is threatened, they close ranks.
Exactly. He observes that they might assimilate newcomers who were genuinely interested in joining, but AER was never going to be assimilated. He was too insulated by his wealth, always able to just import his own society. Moon sees the problem right away. When freezing him out doesn't work, what comes next?
And while all this is happening, AER's wife, Barbara Rainbow, she's a whole other layer of complication. High fashion, spectacular, one of his loveliest possessions.
But she's also seen breezing into the village shop for cheap woodbines or dropping off for fish and chips.
Right, a kind of rebellious freedom from AER's curated image.
She embodies this fascinating contradiction. AER treated her like an expensive showpiece, but she was clearly chafing against that role. Sergeant Moon noted she seemed to be enjoying being rusticated, enjoying the casual freedom of the countryside, which was, the complete opposite of AER's carefully managed life.
It definitely foreshadows her shift in loyalty later on.
It does, away from her dead husband and towards the community. But for now, the real action, the real fight is happening in the church, and it's all about the music.
So the disruption really kicks off after Miss Delapole has to retire. Debilitating arthritis.
And AER immediately volunteers to take over. Organist and choirmaster. The local vicar, the Reverend Stephen Baines, he sees this superficially as providential.
Of course he does. A wealthy, highly skilled volunteer replacing a long-serving, respected local. It seems perfect.
But AER's approach was purely dictatorial. This is where his technical competence becomes a weapon. It becomes deeply insulting. He immediately forces the St. Eada's choir to abandon their cherished works.
The majestic Welsh harmonies. Things like Aberystwyth.
The very songs that embody that emotional wild we talked about. And he replaces them with what the sources described as fashionable, discordant modern pieces, composers like de Ruffel or Messiaen.
And the sources paint such a vivid picture of the fury that followed. The choir was in a seething revolution.
Oh yeah, the congregations were dropping off because they came all primed to sing your heart out, and were then balked by a parcel of discords fighting out a life-or-death struggle.
I love that quote. And the bases, the traditional anchors of the church, they were letting fly after one particularly grating new tune.
The problem wasn't the modern pieces themselves. It was the wholesale rejection of their own cultural heritage in favor of what AER decided was expert or fashionable.
He was treating the church like another exhibition space for his skill?
That's it exactly. He knew how to play the notes, but he knew nothing and felt nothing about the emotional depth or the community's significance of their traditional music.
Sergeant Moon just crystallizes the community's desperation perfectly. He says AER had a hide like a rhinoceros.
He did. He was insulated by his money and his arrogance. Freezing him out wasn't working. He came in and just asserted his own terms, no question of adapting, no question of parlaying.
And the consensus, driven by those furious bases, was simple. He's got to go.
But the adults, they're bound by propriety. They couldn't figure out how to actually reach him. They needed a weakness that his money couldn't shield, a public humiliation that his technical brilliance couldn't just brush aside.
And this is the pivot. This is the moment where the whole narrative shifts from community politics to intellectual warfare.
Yes.
The adults fail to act. So the youth, specifically the choir boys, they decide to take matters into their own hands.
And this centers on one boy in particular, Bossy Jarvis, a prodigious 12-year-old walking time bomb, propelled by these precocious intellectual abilities and a really deep sense of loyalty.
Bossy realized that physical rejection or just being cold to him wouldn't work.
No, they had to hit him where he lived. His professional reputation as an antique dealer.
The plan was to expose him as either a thief or gullible fool who fell for a major forgery.
And if they could do that, he'd be professionally ruined. That failure, that disgrace would force him to spread his wings and fly. The goal was maximum humiliation with minimum overt violence.
And Bossy, with his overwhelming vocabulary and this insatiable thirst for knowledge, a legacy, I suppose, of growing up around that old school, he hatches a plan that is just staggering for a 12-year-old.
Staggering is the right word. He doesn't just invent a forgery. He engineers a trap based on genuine antiquity.
So he uses a genuine leaf of old parchment.
Right. Confirmed by his father's research to be 13th century writing. And crucially, the original script had been incompletely erased. It was a palimpsest.
For our listeners who might not have studied medieval manuscripts, a palimpsest is a piece of parchment where the original text has been scraped or washed off so it can be reused.
But traces of the original script, the ghost text, still lurk just beneath the new writing.
And Bossy uses this genuine 13th century scrap, doctors it with his own deliberately unconvincing text, and then presents it to AER. The level of detail he went into is incredible.
It's astounding. He didn't just scribble on it. He did his research. He used a homemade ink from an authentic old recipe he found in a book called The Complete Housewife.
Wasn't it?
A mixture of walnut shells, skins, and oak galls. He applied this crude but historically accurate ink with a proper quill.
And he made sure the fake writing some rambling poem about a priest's cat was deliberately unconvincing.
Exactly. But the parchment itself and the genuine ghost script beneath the fake, that was the real bait.
He knew he needed something convincing to hook AER. He even asked his dad about using uncials and medieval Latin shorthand.
So the idea of an antiquity was there,
Right.
even if his own overlay was flawed. He presented it to AER as just a worthless scrap he found up in the church tower.
And AER took the bait. Immediately.
Oh, hook, line, and sinker. He was completely cagey, the typical dealer's response to an unexpected find. When Bossy asked him about it a week later, AER dismissed it with practiced contempt. Quite worthless, he said.
But he wouldn't give it back.
Adamantly refused. He knew enough to recognize the quality of the vellum and the potential promise of that palimpsest.
And that very night, AER stays behind after choir practice. Says he needs to lock up for the night.
But Bossy is wary. He hangs around and hears the organ playing again, and he realizes AER is definitely staying behind to have a private look up in the tower, where Bossy claimed he found the leaf.
AER, the ultimate antique dealer, just couldn't pass up the chance, however small, that this little scrap of vellum led to something major.
But the boy's plan to expose him as a fool was about to be tragically superseded. AER's greed for what lay beneath Bossy's deliberate flaw, well, it was about to cost him his life.
So exactly 8 days after AER pocketed that doctored parchment, he is found dead.
Yes, he had fallen from the church tower the night before, right after choir practice.
The discovery by the vicar, Reverend Baines, it was horrific. The church door was unlocked, AER's music case was open on the organ bench, but the man himself was gone.
Baines looks outside, and there's the body. AER had fallen onto a table tomb, an old stone structure, and had crushed his body from the waist down, just squashed his lower half into fragments.
But the positioning of his upper body was absolutely crucial.
It was. The head and shoulders were cushioned by thick grass and brambles right next to the tomb. So at first glance, you might think, tragic accident, clumsy fall, or even a staged suicide.
But the pathologist, Dr. Goodwin, he immediately raised the flag for murder.
Based on one specific injury. AER had a distinct indented wound low at the back of his skull, and Goodwin determined this injury was inflicted before the fall.
The placement is key, right? Low at the back, near the base of the neck.
Yes, it's consistent with a sudden, devastating blow from behind, designed to incapacitate the victim immediately.
So he was struck first and then disposed of.
And the physical evidence of the fall itself corroborated the violence.
How so?
Well, while the blow was probably fatal, or near fatal, AER was alive enough, or conscious enough for a split second, to fight his fate. The sources note he had desperately clawed at the stone parapet of the tower.
So they found evidence under his nails.
Tiny bits of stone dust and grit under his fingernails and embedded in his palms. Someone struck him down, and then, likely while he was unconscious or struggling weakly, hoisted him over the breast-high parapet and dropped him.
That immediately rules out a simple accident, and the location of the wound makes suicide highly improbable. So this brings us right back to motive and the setting. The church tower.
And George Felse immediately focuses his investigation there. The organ loft, where AER was supposed to be packing up his music, it was pristine. But Felse deduced that AER hadn't lingered there.
He'd got higher up.
To the dark, dusty bell chamber. And up there, Felse found evidence of recent disturbance in two sadly decayed wooden chests that were filled with old magazines, some dating back to the late 18th century.
The critical evidence here was the dust.
The dust marks, yes.
Yeah.
Scuffed and disturbed. AER, the meticulous antiquarian, was clearly hunting for something specific. Right in the place Bossy claimed to have found the parchment.
So this solidifies the motive. It has to be the parchment.
It has to be. AER believed the leaf Bossy gave him was a clue to a greater treasure hidden specifically in the tower, probably in those old chests, and significantly the parchment itself is now missing.
From his body, from the church, from everywhere.
Which proves the killer knew what AER was hunting for and stole the essential clue.
Now, the professor, Evan Joyce, he provides the critical confirmation of the parchment's value, doesn't he?
He does. AER went to him on the Saturday before his death, seeking a consultation. Probably trying to gauge its value without giving away the discovery location.
Very typical AER.
Very. And Joyce confirmed that the original cleaning of the palimpsest was cursory, and there was indeed a highly promising genuine script visible below Bossy's fake layer.
Joyce got a little too excited about it.
He looked too interested and too eager, and AER practically snatched the parchment back. He realized he'd confirmed the potential for a fortune, but also recognized the risk of sharing that knowledge.
And that desperation, that greed, is what brought him back to the church that night.
And potentially alerted others to the find. It feels like AER, in his characteristic arrogance, thought he could use the professor's knowledge just long enough to confirm the value and then cut him out of the actual discovery.
But someone else, alerted either by that visit or by observing AER's behavior, must have followed him or met him there.
Precisely. Whoever was responsible was either present that night or had been alerted to the potential of a major find. This sets the stage for a killer operating in AER's own ruthless professional world, or someone close enough to the church to know his routines.
So let's run through the initial suspects, how Felse cleared the innocent and started to focus on the real threat. First, there's Barbara Rainbow,
AER's wife, and his will was surprisingly punitive toward her. It left her only the house, while almost £250,000 went to his mistress.
So she has a motive. Her initial story that she was home alone all night, that falls apart pretty quickly.
It does. Ms. Delapole reported seeing the Aston Martin driving up the valley that night. So Barbara then admits she took the car out for a drive alone.
But this is where the cultural dynamics of Middle Hope really come into play.
Yes. Willie the Twig, the forest warden. He steps forward. He confirms he was with Barbara at his lodge from about 8:30 p.m. until 11:30 p.m.
And crucially, Willie insists on total openness about their relationship.
He does. He argues that giving each other an alibi puts them just alongside all the rest of Middle Hope's tightly closed ranks.
That is just a remarkable moment of community solidarity, isn't it? He forces her to be honest, not just for the police, but to integrate her fully into the community's defense mechanism.
It's incredible. She's no longer the high-fashion possession. She's now an integral, if unconventional, part of Middle Hope.
So that confirmed alibi shifts the focus away from Barbara. Then there's Isabel Lavery, the Birmingham mistress who inherits all the money.
She had a rock-solid bridge party alibi, confirmed by multiple witnesses. She was in the clear and already anticipating the bliss of being both respectable and rich.
Which brings us to Evan Joyce, the professor, the man AER consulted.
And George Felse, with his typical methodical genius, he just baits him perfectly. Joyce had large feet. So Felse very astutely gets Joyce to step onto some moist soil.
And leaves a perfect impression of his shoe.
A perfect impression. The right size, trodden down at the heel, unevenly weighted with a distinct crack right across the sole.
Which perfectly matched a print they found.
On the bell chamber stairs. It proved Joyce did go up the tower. Felse confronts him, and Joyce admits it. He was there that night. He was dead curious about where that membrane came from, especially after AER snatched it back.
So he confesses to lurking in the back of the church during choir practice, assuming AER would come back to search.
He did. He climbed up the first set of stairs, but stopped when he heard voices above him in the darkness.
2 voices.
2 male voices, muted and annoyed. He couldn't distinguish the words because of the echo, and assuming AER was already busy with someone else, maybe a secret business contact, Joyce just turned around and went home.
And his confession seems genuine.
It really rings true, especially when he volunteers the detail about the 2 voices. He even confessed he'd almost have tossed Rainbow off the tower himself for the glory of the discovery, but he never got the chance.
So his presence only confirms 2 things. AER was up there, and he wasn't alone.
And the stage is now perfectly set for the actual killer, someone from AER's ruthless professional world to emerge.
So the investigation shifts. It's no longer about who hated AER. It's about who knew about the parchment and had a professional motive strong enough to kill him for it.
But the murderer made a terrible, fatal mistake. He went after the one person who held the key to his identity, Bossy Jarvis.
The initial fear that the murderer knew Bossy was a witness. It materializes when Bossy realizes he'd lost something.
A copy of his lock anthem, "Turn thy face from my sins," near the church. It was solded, sticking out of his blazer pocket, and it had his name and address written clearly on it.
The killer must have found it that night.
Or shortly after. And that piece of paper gave the killer Bossy's name and location. It established him as the direct link between the parchment and the church.
And since the killer had already stolen the parchment, the motive for murder, he now had to eliminate the only witness who knew the parchment's source.
Which resulted in an attempted murder. Bossy was deliberately run down by a dark green SAB after his Saturday evening music lesson.
He was struck, knocked down, broke his ankle.
Right. And this was no accident that ended in a panicked flight. Bossy, lying there injured, he observed the car stop a few yards past. The driver didn't jump out to help. The car started backing up, slowly, deliberately.
Positioning itself to straighten out again behind me and run me over.
Chilling. The driver only fled when he heard another car approaching. It was Barbara Rainbow and Willie the Twig arriving on the scene completely by accident.
The attempt was just cold-blooded and calculated, and the identity of the vehicle, the dark green SAB, that becomes a critical piece of the puzzle.
It does. It leads the police to trace its use to certain individuals who had temporary access. But the attempt also has a profound effect on Bossy. Lying in the hospital under threat, he finally opens up. He reveals the entire scheme.
And this is where the sheer intellectual loyalty of this boy truly shines. George Felse and Sergeant Moon are at the hospital, and Toby Malcolm, the theater pro, the former delinquent.
He confesses. He admits that he was the source of the parchment leaf. He'd stolen it years ago from rubble in the Modisham Abbey stable block during his school days.
And Bossy had refused to name Toby to the police, out of loyalty, even after someone tried to kill him.
It's an incredible breakthrough. The police now have the document's true provenance, Modisham Abbey. And they know why Bossy clammed up. Loyalty to Toby, who's like a big brother to him, a role model who had gone straight.
So the investigation shifts entirely, away from the church tower, which was just AER's temporary hiding place for the clue.
And on to the Abbey, the source of the real treasure.
George Felse starts connecting the dots. The parchment, AER's professional life, the Abbey's history. He knew AER was ruthless, but he operated in a competitive world.
He would have needed to consult someone, or at the very least, his movements would have been monitored by his rivals.
And Felse immediately focuses on Colin Barron, another antique dealer, a rival to AER who had attended that housewarming party.
Right. Barron was described as urban, shrewd, and having learned a lot from AER. As Barron himself chillingly admitted, when a chap like AER moves into these parts, it pays to take a look at the territory and see what drew him there.
Barron recognized the value of Modisham Abbey, which was under National Trust renovation, as a potential source of finds.
And the SAB link confirms Barron's opportunity. He had been working on some of the Abbey's antiques, which positioned him right in the middle of any potential discovery.
And the police traces confirmed he'd volunteered to do the evening rounds at the Abbey on the night of Bossy's attack,
giving him temporary access to that dark green SAB.
So the pieces are all falling into place. Barron must have realized AER's discovery was linked to the Abbey. He tracked AER, maybe encountered him in the tower, and when AER refused to share, he struck him down and stole the parchment.
Then, finding Bossy's music sheet, he drove the SAB to Comerford to eliminate the loose end.
The boys, meanwhile, they realize that the murderer will inevitably return to the Abbey to search the true origin point.
And they decide to beat him to it. Bossy and his friends go on a field trip to Modisham Abbey, determined to find the treasure before the killer gets back.
It just shows that innate intellectual drive from the old-school environment, doesn't it? Despite the danger, the lure of the manuscript drove them, so Bossy bravely sneaks into the Abbey's North Walk after hours.
The North Walk, which was once the scriptorium, where the monks would have worked. It's described as a long, dimly lit, rough room with an ancient, bulging stone wall.
The very wall where Toby said he found the original parchment rubble years ago.
So Bossy is exploring this wall, trying to figure out why it felt hollow, when the door clicks open and the light suddenly blazes on.
And in the doorway is their friendly guide from the afternoon tour, Colin Barron,
who maintains this facade of amusement. He's teasing Bossy about his excess of enthusiasm, offers to drive him home.
But the mask drops in a split second. Barron, while he's talking benevolently, reaches into his pocket, selects a key, and quietly locks the door.
And the floodlight hits his hand as he does it. And Bossy, frozen, sees the flash.
The critical piece of identification.
Barron is wearing a large, flattish seal ring made from a black stone, like onyx. And Bossy, in that moment of terror, suddenly recalls seeing that same flash from that same ring.
As the killer turned up AER's face under the church tower, checking if he was dead before he tossed him.
The ring, used in that moment of violence. It's the singular, indelible detail that confirms the identity.
And in that terrifying instant, Bossy realizes he is locked in the North Walk with AER's murderer. The amateur investigation is now an extreme hostage situation.
And the only thing protecting him is Barron's immediate desire to escape with whatever treasure he thinks is hidden there.
Barron, now exposed, is furious. He's genuinely aggrieved, demanding why Bossy had to meddle and force his hand to this repugnant act.
And Bossy, despite his terror, immediately starts using delaying tactics. He definitely claims his friends know where he is, but Barron is too shrewd for that.
He quickly binds Bossy with baling twine, just a piece of farm detritus he found nearby. He pinions his arms and loops the cord tightly, cruelly around his neck.
Barron had anticipated this. He was already positioned to negotiate. He demands a clean escape car and 12 hours of freedom in exchange for the boy's life.
The police arrive quickly. Felse, Moon, Toby, and Sam Jarvis. They've been alerted by the anxious choir boys. They find the door locked and hear Baron's voice, now high-pitched and vindictive, threatening to kill Bossy if they try to break in.
A total stalemate. They're locked outside an ancient, thick stone structure.
And George Felse immediately begins a negotiation, keeping up this relentless barrage of talk to prevent Baron from thinking clearly. But Baron's tough.
He's driven by this idea of immense wealth, and he's convinced he has the upper hand. He recognizes that killing Bossy guarantees his capture, but he tries to leverage the lack of capital punishment, suggesting he might get a lesser sentence if he eliminates the only witness.
It's a critical psychological moment. Logic versus pure spite and desperation. They need a distraction. And they need a way to physically breach those ancient walls.
And this is where Barbara Rainbow attempts her spectacular, almost theatrical, intervention.
She calls out to Baron, offers herself up as a hostage instead, daring him to take her.
It was a brilliant tactical move. Willie the Twig noted that her intervention affirmed to Baron that Bossy was a valuable bargaining chip. Replacing him with Barbara gained him nothing.
It buys them precious time.
But time is running out for Bossy, with that twine cutting into his neck.
While George and Moon are doing the psychological siege at the door, Toby Malcolm starts circling the stable block.
And he runs into Bossy's friends, Spuggy, Ginger, and Toffee Bill. They'd been worried about Bossy and came back. And Spuggy confirms he'd noticed a particular section of that north walk wall was bulging and crumbling earlier in the day.
The ingenious local knowledge rescue plan is hatched instantly.
Willie the Twig joins them, finds a long three-fold folding ladder used by the maintenance crew, and they realize they can use it as a makeshift battering ram.
Targeting the exact bulging spot Spuggy had identified, a place where you could see daylight through tiny gaps in the stone.
It's this exhilarating, desperate charge. The former delinquent, the recluse forest warden, and the three choir boys using a folding ladder against a centuries-old abbey wall.
They launch the ladder, hit the spot, and the impact against that weak, ancient stone, the whole wall just explodes inward.
The sound must have been deafening. The impact showers everyone in thick, acrid dust and debris. Baron, stunned and bloodied by the falling stone, instinctively drops Bossy and covers his head.
The force of the community's desperate ingenuity literally broke down the barrier protecting the murderer.
Felse and Moon dive in. They dig Baron out from the rubble, stunned but alive. And Bossy, largely protected by Baron's body, is unwound from the twine and immediately, triumphantly confirms the identity. He points to the ring. When he locked the door, I saw the light flash off that flat stone in his ring and I remembered it.
And the evidentiary breakthrough is immediate and total.
From Baron's breast pocket, Felse pulls out a narrow suede bag, which Barbara confirms belonged to AER, and inside is Bossy's rolled, doctored parchment.
Motive and identity. Confirmed beyond all doubt.
He killed AER for the clue to the treasure and tried to silence the only witness.
But the truly breathtaking discovery comes next, the unexpected consequence of the demolition.
Yes. Spuggy Price, still holding a piece of crumbling plaster he'd poked out of the wall earlier, peels away the plaster bits and finds 4 more leaves of perfectly preserved vellum.
And the boys, energized, start digging in the rubble and find more and more.
And it was confirmed. The monks, in the days of penury and decline, when the abbey was decaying and they lacked money for repairs, they had used their priceless library manuscripts, rolled and folded, to plug holes in the wall, as filling to be plastered over and seal the gaps.
The treasure AER died for wasn't a hidden chest of gold.
It was the lost abbey library, concealed for centuries, and now accidentally recovered because a murder, motivated by a single fake clue, caused a wall to be demolished.
So we circle back to the core question. What does this all mean? The murder of Arthur Everard Rainbow, the man who valued money over culture, ultimately led to the physical breakdown of a structure which, in turn, revealed and preserved an immense medieval cultural treasure.
The irony is just delicious and total. AER died chasing material wealth which would have gone to the highest bidder, likely sold abroad. Instead, his greedy ambition, channeled through his equally greedy rival, Colin Baron, caused the very structure they sought to exploit to collapse.
And that revealed the Abbey's true inheritance.
The wealth and expertise that AER and Baron relied on were rendered utterly irrelevant. The tribal solidarity of Millhope, the knowledge of the former delinquent, the skill of the forest warden, and the sheer critical thinking of a 12-year-old choir boy solve the case, and save the cultural heritage.
And the manuscript's ultimate fate is a positive one. The library becomes a matter for amicable negotiation between the Trust and the Department of the Environment.
Right. The value is likely used to maintain the abbey. No private dealer gets the money, and the lost knowledge is returned to the public domain.
It's complete victory for culture over commerce.
And we have to return to the resilience of Bossy Jarvis, who started this whole thing. He faced a murderer who tried to run him down, was held hostage with twine around his neck, yet the very next morning,
The day after the siege.
he rose, fresh as a daisy, and went to school with an epic, life-changing tale to tell. He just seemed to ride the entire experience with complete phlegm, returning to the normalcy of the community he had just defended.
We'll leave you with this final thought. It was composed by Bossy and his friends on a scrap of paper during the sermon the following Sunday, once the community was safe and the traditional, comforting music had returned to St. Ada's.
They wrote, "When shriveling like a parchèd scroll, far from my home on life's rough way, why restless, why cast down my soul, timor mortis conturbat me."
The fear of death disturbs me.
And yet Bossy, who had faced that fear so directly struck by the car, strangled by the twine, seemed unfazed. He's seen eagerly riding off to catch the bus and tell his story. So does true resilience mean having a faith so strong that the righteous must prevail? Or is it simply that critical thinking, loyalty, and sheer intellectual engagement provide the best, most lasting defense against chaos and the destructive forces of unchecked ambition?
A question for you to ponder long after this deep dive ends. Thank you for joining us.